Hey, it's Kate Brown here. At ArtNet, we're easing into 2025 after the holidays. And while we're finalizing an excellent lineup of new episodes, we're revisiting a highlight from 2024 and one that I'm especially proud of. In this episode, I had the privilege of sitting down with the renowned artist Miranda July to explore her creative practice, her relationship with technology, and how she continues to evolve as an artist. We'll be back next week with new episodes, but in the meantime, thank you for listening and a Happy New Year.
As an artist, you go in and the risk involved, well, that's just the price of the ticket to get to go to the place you really wanted to go, like why you chose this path.
I'm Kate Brown, and this is The Art Angle, a podcast from ArtNet News. The filmmaker, artist, and writer Miranda July has worked across such a variety of media over the years, one might say it is almost hard to categorize her work. But there is actually a strong through line that emerges when you consider July's vast oeuvre, an interest in how the remarkable may occur in small everyday moments and interactions, an interest in loneliness and needing each other, in our capacity to change, in love, sexuality, and death. All these aspects that really make us human. With this, July has built a diverse and awe-inspiring body of work. It includes a messaging app she developed called Somebody and an interfaith secondhand shop. Her art has been on view at the Venice Biennale, and she has also made 3 feature-length films, 2 of which she starred in. She has published 4 books, and a participatory website called Learning to Love You More that she created with American artist Harold Fletcher consists of assignments for the general public who make the art. There are instructions like, make a portrait of your friend's desires, or perform the phone call someone else wished they could have. One of these assignments is part of her first solo exhibition, a major retrospective on view at Fondazione Prada in Milan until the end of October. It is assignment 43, make an exhibition of the art in your parents' house, and it was completed by a local woman from Milan. It is one piece among many in a show that spans 30 years of July's practice. There is also a new participatory video series in the mix called Family, an acronym for Falling Apart, Meanwhile, I Love You. Her newest novel, All Fours, was published in May this year, a New York Times bestseller and longlist finalist for the National Book Award. All Fours is an astonishingly candid look at sexuality and transformation, but also at an extremely underrepresented topic in literature, menopause and female aging. When I connected with July, she was in her home, which is also her studio in Los Angeles. A small painting by Louise Bonnet hung just behind her. It's called Miranda, and it's a contemplative portrait of a female figure in what looks like a state of metamorphosis. It suits July's universe quite poetically. Hi, Miranda. Thanks so much for joining me on The Art Angle today. Where am I finding you?
I'm in my home in Echo Park, Los Angeles.
Nice. I'm all the way on the other side of the world in Berlin, so we're meeting in very different times of day, but I'm really excited to have you on the show. I'm so grateful, actually, because I was thinking about this before we went on the air. Like, you first entered my orbit when I was in high school and I went to the film store trying to be cool and went to the indie film section and grabbed a couple films. I grabbed Gus Van Sant's Elephant and I grabbed Me, You, and Everyone We Know. And I went home, and I think it was really one of my first moments of just coming to realize that there was this whole other world of art and creativity that I didn't know about. And I feel like I've been following your work throughout my life since then. And you've always been this kind of lighthouse of digesting and metabolizing experiences for people, but also for women in particular. So I'm really excited to talk to you today about your new book and also about your first retrospective at the Fondazione Prada.
Great. Yeah.
I wanted to talk about also taboos and social media and so much else, but maybe first we should start with All Fours, which came out in May. This novel, as I was just saying, was quite life-changing to read, and I was trying to think of a way of describing it to people without spoiling it for people, and I think that I came up with something, which is that it's almost like a window was open and the breeze came in, and I didn't realize until the window was open how stuffy the air was in the room. It's a really profound book about midlife for women that has not been explored in quite the same way that I'm aware of. Could you share a bit about the concept for the story and why you wrote it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was in the room not knowing either that the window wasn't open, but feeling kind of through my conversations with other women, like something's off, like something's not lining up between our experience of this time, which was kind of wild. It was kind of like we felt like we were seeing right through structures that we had actually worked hard to create and had participated in, and suddenly newer, more realer, kind of more intimate realities were like rising up within us. And that felt powerful and exciting and really confusing and upsetting and painful because, of course, we were living within these structures. It doesn't seem to be any way out. And like you said, you don't know the window's not open in that room. And meanwhile, the world is telling us you're getting old now. We'll tell you what's happening now. It's not what you're feeling. It's actually like the story's sort of ending, your woman story. So I felt my way through that through conversations. I did have a story, but I sort of took a while to come to it because I kind of wanted it to be as big as possible, to not just be a story that I made up, because I knew there was a truth in a way where I almost could have written like a call to arms or an essay or a manifesto or something. But actually, I couldn't have because I didn't know what I was talking about. And fiction has a sort of magic to me. And I wanted incredible pleasure. That was something me and the other women I was talking to had in common. I wanted to feel it. And I wanted this new room to contain pleasure. And I love fiction. So I felt, it could hold sort of the joy and excitement that I was feeling, the newness and the kind of like risk, Everything I'm saying to you now seems sort of maybe fine in hindsight, but for the 4 years I was writing, I was like, or it's nothing, or get over yourself, or grow up.
Yeah.
It's so easy to dismiss these feelings. Like, what are we even talking about? I know I'm being kind of actually truly broad right now because I'm not using any nouns. But the feeling inside is also easily ephemeral.
I think that is probably true for the experience of writing and making art more generally, but especially I can imagine when you're writing a story that I don't think has really been written before about a woman going through midlife. Without giving spoilers, she leaves her house to go to a different city and actually like goes 20 minutes from her house, and this kind of somewhere between an art project and a midlife crisis and like an interior adventure ensues. And so I can see how much risk was involved in that because you're really like scraping the barrel of your soul, I can imagine. And, I wanted to ask you, like the main character is an artist. It's also kind of broadly described what she makes. I think it's an unlikely coupling of sex surrealism and lesbianism is said in the book. Could you speak a bit about why it felt important to tie up creative pursuit and also these questions about biological and spiritual aging?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question. In as much as the book is, and those two things are also about freedom, especially for a woman, I think for me, the key to not just getting caught in some sort of thought loop around these topics of aging and just kind of how to go forward and fear that creativity, like making art, and I did leave it really open, so that can include a lot of things, people on this podcast must have tried to explain this before, but there's something in it that speaks directly to the soul. We know it when we listen to music or look at a great painting, and thus it just breezes past all the structures that were created to kind of erase the power of that, the rebellious power of it, the strength and the kind of internal freedom that it creates. And so, I myself needed to feel connected to that while writing, right? Just as an artist. And then I needed my narrator to have that relationship because she had to somehow follow this thread forward through a lot of mundane things, through school lunches, through a bunch of masturbation and fantasy, and to some place that actually was like a livable path forward.
In some respects, it does not obviously exactly, but it does mirror your own biography to some extent. And that's something that you've played with in other work. How do you expose yourself in that way while also protecting yourself? Because I'm sure lots of people project onto this character that like, oh, this is Miranda July. And I feel like that's something you've played with quite intelligently over the years.
Sure, yeah. It's funny, there's a thing I did in my performances first, which was take real things from the audience and have holes in the performance that allowed these real things to come in. So maybe I'd cast a couple from the audience in the performance. And what could this couple do that no two actors could do as well? Like their intimacy. They could kiss. I could ask them to kiss and they could do that perfectly, maybe awkwardly because they were in front of an audience, but in the way that they do it awkwardly. And that would lend this reality to the whole night, to the rest of the fiction. And for example, in this performance, New Society, I did that again and again. The whole performance was sort of a lace of holes for the audience. And I think what that did was make the audience feel like, oh, wow, this performance could only happen tonight with me, with us. And that really got at the present moment, which is kind of one of my materials. And I think this book is actually, well, yes, I have the issues of any fiction writer or filmmaker of kind of like making a sort of stand-in for myself or whatever. I'd been a bit more traditional in the past of like, here's her fictional job, here's her body, which doesn't quite look like my body. And with this one, I think I wanted to go the road of New Society, of these performances, which is to say not autofiction or anything. I mean, I love autofiction. I probably was actually influenced by it, but more so by my own work where I realized, oh, it doesn't take very much reality to suddenly call all the fiction onto its feet into a state of kind of aliveness. And so, yeah, I didn't give her name. I left that open. I left her job open enough that you could project my job onto it. Certain little kind of fun things, almost like you don't have to dig too hard to find out my best friend is a sculptor, as is the best friend in the book. And I dedicate the book to Isabel Albuquerque, the sculptor. But in other ways, it has to be very opaque. I'm a mom, I'm protective of my world. So most other things are really invented, or just the fictional kind of like you take a thing here and there. But I guess it's those significant loanings of myself to the character that give it the aliveness that performance does. And I knew that that was sort of a mess, in a way, especially when women are writers are so often conflated with their narrators as if they can't conceive of a world and so on and so forth. But I was also kind of like, I'm so far past that question. And I think the world is actually so much more sophisticated at this point with playing with fiction and reality and social media and this and that I felt like, well, this is a modern approach to that. And I do believe we're here. This isn't going to call my ability to write into question.
Yeah, I do agree with you that there's an aliveness to the fiction that I think, it sounds like only from motherhood could you describe those scenes with the child in the book. The mundanity, like I also have a 7-year-old, so it was so accurate the way you described these little interactions, these nothingness liminal moments. But on the note of bringing your life in and bringing in social media and that kind of wavering line between and where you draw them and erase them again, when you're reading the book, and if you happen to follow you on social media, there's this interesting overlay with Instagram. I don't want to give any spoilers, but you have this dance performance that you do on Instagram. And I could see in the background of, I think one of them, like the storyboard of all fours. And then there's this element in the plot that has Instagram performance involved. I wanted to ask you about that kind of idea of like a total work of art where there isn't really so much of a division line between the different sort of platforms or mediums that you're even working on. Like, is it a conscious choice or does everything just fold into itself?
Yeah, the whole thing is so crafted, the book, right? But I rewrite a zillion times, and I could show you drafts of this book that have the actress Amy Adams as a character in it. Like there's, there's been so many versions of this book. So it sounds a little too easy when it feels like, oh, it just kind of fell out of my life. But I guess there's points where it feels a little bit arch to create a fake Miranda July. And actually, creating fake art in general in books and movies is a bit of a tricky zone. I've encountered this before. And we all sort of hold our breath when like a quote unquote great painting or great painter is going to be revealed in a movie. It's like, oh dear God, what can you do there?
Yeah.
And so I think in general, I've kind of erred on, well, I do work in these other mediums. So if the character is a little like me, I might as well just draw from myself. I mean, there's a lot of dance I had to create and a lot of other dancers, male dancers that I was looking at and even dancing with. But yeah, there's little moments. And honestly, I didn't sweat too much about those. Sometimes there were poignant moments in my own life, and I saw a resonance. And so I took it. And then other moments that wasn't there and it was in the book. And so I had to create it. In most cases, I love to information seek probably too much when I'm loving a person or an author or writer. And so my mind is sometimes boggled about how much is there. If you want a deep dive, like this is the ultimate deep dive. And it goes back years. And they're not really clues or Easter eggs or anything tricky like that. I think it's just, yeah, I'm living a life here and it's a real life and I'm an artist and a fiction writer. So it's,
it's world building and it's great to be able to join it. I think you've always had a way of bringing in the audience, not like pulling them in, but like opening the door and letting them walk in if they want to. One of the sort of like themes in All Fours, but also in other artworks of yours and films of yours, this idea of feminine experience. And there was something that you said in your recent New Yorker profile that really struck me is that the femininity we were instructed in was actually just youth. And I was thinking about that in terms of the art world, which, you've got one foot in as well as all the many industries that you work between. And oftentimes I either get press releases from female artists who are under 27 or female artists who are over 80. And it feels like in between, there is just this total invisible career that doesn't quite exist as it should. And I wanted to ask you about that kind of invisibility of midlife, because it's something that you grapple with in the book, but then I also wonder how you think about that in terms of your own art career and your own filmmaking career.
I think time throughout my work, time and aging at all the different ages has been one of my interests and feels kind of sci-fi and like, how did we construct this thing that we believe in so hard? And then there's another layer on top of that, like, and not only did we create time, we created all this value based on it, that runs the world and people's opportunity and the sense of value of a person. And often you're kind of unaware of how you're playing into it. Not even playing into it. It's just that you don't understand your own value or why things are happening entirely when you're a young woman. You're fighting so hard against all this kind of infantilization. And yet at the same time, that is the only power you have in some situations. Like your deeper power is not, in fact, going to open that door. And that becomes clearer as you get older, and that childlike possibility of you, that the idea that you're brand new and someone might have power over you, the erotic power of that. You never even really had to have an interest in it to suddenly look back and be like, oh, that was at play and now it's not. And I think most women artists, honestly, it's not that interesting to them. That was never their topic to begin with. And so it's not like some crisis exactly. It's more a crisis for other people who are suddenly missing a voice. Like you still have your voice. You still have the voices of all your peers. And also I'm in a tricky position because I did receive a lot of support when I was young and kind of built my career on it. I have a lot of friends who are just coming into themselves as artists and into their careers now in midlife. And I always loved the stories of that. I mean, I think it often has to be that way because of various kinds of caretaking. So I'm not giving like a pointed answer here, but like you, it's always kind of stunning to me when we read the profile, the sort of big news of, oh, this woman's 89 and she's kept doing her work the whole time. And what a discovery. Yeah. There's just a treasure trove of all this work. And it always seems very convenient to me, like, oh, you get to sweep in, get the benefit of discovering this person without having supported them all along the way. And she's going to die soon. So it's actually not a huge investment you're making in her life. And I think people are scared by what's in the middle because that's a value that isn't capitalist and isn't procreative, can't be controlled through reproductive rights. And so what is that? What is that time for a woman? Why wouldn't that be an incredibly powerful time? And how fantastic was the construction that concealed that? Like how total? Like I kind of want to just slow clap it, you know?
Yeah.
Because that was a good one. Very effective.
For sure. You said in another interview about how people often go on WebMD and look up the things that are affecting their bodies, but rarely ever anybody else's particular problems. And I was thinking about, in that sense, that's part of the reason why I think menopause is kind of like taboo and sort of ignored part of society, because as you say, it doesn't really serve any function for the capitalist outputs that we treasure so much. And in that sense, it becomes a bit of a taboo subject. I mean, I'm a woman. I don't even really understand what perimenopause is until I really read about it in your book, actually. I want to ask you about working with taboos as subject matter, because I imagine you're also kind of putting yourself out on a limb, and you're also potentially making people feel uncomfortable, even if you're talking about sex or vulnerability in your work. And these are, common topics for you. There's always this idea of safety and unsafety in the conversations right now. And how do you navigate that? And I mean, what wisdom would you impart on younger artists who want to sort of deal with these like marginal topics?
I mean, I guess I think the greatest power is in the things that you've been living with blindly. So even if you take it on just the smallest scale, if you're getting a massage or even just someone's holding you and they go like, just relax. Can you let the tension go in your shoulder? And you're like, I am perfectly relaxed. And then maybe in a moment you drop everything and it's kind of horrifying. You think, oh, wait, was I in this state, this kind of crouched state for how long? And I honestly, honest to God, thought I was relaxed. So that's like the tiniest micro scale of the kind of thing that you could zoom out and say like, oh, was I living in this paradigm that had no room for me to actually live, and that may actually be why you were in the crouched position. And yet I was blind to it. And so when you get those little moments where you go, oh, wait, I'm seeing around a corner here. Maybe everything isn't as I thought it was. And it's reasons for both internal and you're mirroring things, external structures that are working quite hard to create that reality, consciously or not. And that's a really wonderful place. Like when you feel that shift, that just sort of inkling that you're seeing something from a different angle, that's where you go in. As an artist, you go in, and the risk involved, well, that's just the price of the ticket to get to go to the place you really wanted to go, like why you chose this path. It wasn't just to recreate the crouched state again and again. It was to get to go somewhere new and to create new space in the world. And so I guess the risk part, yes, just to get human for a second. When I was first starting to realize I was going to write the book, some of my concerns were like, but then people will know I'm old. Like I would really think like, but how
You've outed yourself.
Yeah. So I'm not trying to say I'm just in this like metaphysical space and that's why I'm able to take the risk. No, I'm simultaneously going, but I could have kept this going for so much longer, this idea that I was some vague age. And then you kind of just, since that's like a real world problem, it's not stupid. Like there were benefits to that probably. But then you think like, okay, well, what are going to be the benefits of this other way, of this pointing out the crouched position? That's just the metaphor we got going here. I think, well, I guess it'd be like my conversation with hundreds of thousands of women in the world would be like the conversation I have with my best friend right now. that might be a kind of good thing to have, given that I am only going to get older and eventually the cat's going to be out of the bag and something's going to have to sustain me. And so I just kind of let go of one kind of safety and grabbed on to what I hoped would be there if I pursued this.
Sounds like that motivation is really about doing something for yourself first and not necessarily like audience considerations do come into it for artists. But I think that it's a piece of wisdom I take from that is that you have to really want to be interested in something for yourself and not just the outcome of what it will seem like to others. And maybe that's like a good moment to pivot to your retrospective at Fondazione Prada, which is an expansive view of your work across the years. It's called New Society. I understand that you, for the show with the curator Mia Locks, like went through your entire archive, which is all boxed up in your studio and in your home. Can you speak a bit about the show and also about that process of like unboxing your past and your present?
Yeah, I mean, I had saved everything, but not really gone through it. You know, like you have all these tapes from performances going back through different formats. I think initially when I started performing, in my teens, early 20s, I was like, well, after each performance, I'll sit down and I'll edit the performance document, and of course I literally did that 0 times. But I did keep the tapes, which turned out to be the main thing. And with a growing sense of like, one day there's going to be a lot of work to do if anyone ever cares about this. And that day came. And in fact, Mia, when she realized that there was documentation of all these performances, and they're not so many, it's maybe 5 full-length performances, so it's like the equivalent of having 5 feature films or something, but in this other medium that haven't been edited. And she was like, well, there's not enough room or budget to show every single thing you've made, or you're even in every medium. Like, we're not going to show the sculptures from the 2009 Venice Biennale because there's no space for that. Really no sculptural work, not even all the technology. That can't be the through line, but we can show all the performance. And so I sat down and edited it with longtime editor Erin Beckham. And that was a trip because, you remember certain things, that one clip, the clip you saved and promoted with, but the whole rest of it, I just would be sitting there like, I'm 24. I'm on stage in front of a huge audience, like that was kind of the point where I shifted from like the punk world to Portland Institute for Contemporary Art, when in a season that was like Diamanda Galas. And I'm just really going for it. And I think as a 50-year-old person looking at that, editing it, or almost 50 at that time, it was just like, what is she thinking? Why is she doing this? Like, there's no points of reference. Like, what had I even seen that I was going off of? I mean, to be honest, I called them live movies and I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I didn't have access to make a feature-length film. And so that was part of it, and I was making short movies at the time. And it was art. Like, I was making work in this space that doesn't have to know what it is. That was always the draw of art as opposed to feature filmmaking or writing fiction. It can retain its mystery in terms of form. Doing that process again and again with those performances was something. Yeah, like I passed through some midlife point while doing that.
That must have been so emotionally intense to see that much of yourself at that age and wade through it. Was there one work in particular that's in the show that really like surprised you in retrospect?
I mean, you know how you sort of decide certain works, like that didn't really work out, whatever. At the time, you're like, good idea, but I really nailed it the next time with the next work. And there was a performance called Things We Don't Understand and Definitely Are Not Going to Talk About. Right there with the name, a little long. And when me and Erin edited it, it was kind of striking how perfectly it held together. And I realized, I was learning so much at this juncture about storytelling, both in film and in fiction. And here it is also taking place in performance. And it does actually hold together. And I can't even quite remember the anxieties that made me not feel so confident about that piece. But the anxieties were such that I went on to remake it as a feature film called The Future. And then after that, make a book called It Chooses You, also about the same thing. Which, looking back, I think all of that anxiety, but whatever. I mean, a lot of art kind of rides on anxiety or a certain confusion or mystery may have had to do with that I had just had this breakout success of Me and You and Everyone We Know. And that was so much more mainstream than not only anything that had happened before, but then exactly where my heart was, where my anchor was. So I think I was trying to feel that out in every medium through this one story. And that probably felt really chaotic. And I felt more self-conscious because the audiences were so much bigger and they were going to see like the girl in the movie.
Right.
So yeah, I think that surprised me and kind of made me realize your job really as the artist is not to review these things. Like you don't have any sense of that. You are the process,
That's a great way to put it. One work that really struck me for its prescience, maybe, is Learning to Love You More, which you made between 2002 and 2009. It's this collaborative website that you made with Harold Fletcher with all these prompts. And I was just looking at it, like sitting from where we are in 2024. And I was just really stunned by the innovative creativity that you guys had with this. And also just looking at the internet with such creative eyes at that time when, I don't know, I think I was just like ripping music off the internet back then. And that was kind of about it, Could you speak a bit about your long-standing interest in technology? Because it's something that has always been present for you, I think, in your work somehow.
Yeah, that project, which gave art assignments to the public, and then the public would upload their results and we would post them. What I think sometimes people can't see about it now is that concept had sort of like some irony built into it because, of course, the internet and uploading is for work. It's like for tax forms and things. And
True.
Even having a URL that's learningtoloveyouMore.com is like funny, like using it as an art medium was a little bit like using LinkedIn as an art medium or something like that. So much so that a lot of the people couldn't figure out how to upload the work in these different mediums and would ultimately end up mailing it.
I guess, especially in like 2002 and in the
early 2000. Yeah. Although, over time that changed. Yeah. And I think we were also interested because, here we are, two artists, myself and Harold Fletcher. The whole thing is about being original and spectacular and new. And so the idea of following an assignment and everyone's output looking sort of similar materials itself was a kind of rebellion. It was sort of saying like there's something about doing something with other people that's powerful. Like if you think of singing like a cover of a song, that's actually one of the assignments is a cover of a song. There's incredible joy in singing a song that other people have sung through decades. And we were trying to get at something that felt good about art that I guess didn't have to do with ego in quite such a clear-cut way, since, of course, you're wrestling with that all the time in terms of an audience. Yeah, and I think I also have this ongoing thing of trying to figure out how to direct. And so the meticulousness of directions you have to give and changing them again and again. I'm still doing that in my work. And that's almost like a kink, that's like, touch me like this. No, like that. No, I want it to be like this,
You seem to have this ongoing interest also in how much you concede a bit of control while also maintaining your artistic authorship. That's a really interesting kind of vector that I feel like you explore. And I was thinking about this work that you made in 2002, which has an element of that you began in 2002, I should say. And then there's this new work that you just made for the Fondazione Prada, I believe, called Family, Falling Apart Me While I Love You, which is also collaborating with members of the public. And you said something in the introduction to the Fondazione catalog, which I'm probably not getting it right, but there's a rigorousness to yielding control or ceding control. And I really thought that was powerful. Could you expand a bit on that and also talk a bit about that work in particular?
What is it? I guess it's we love the moment when we're writing or making something, when we're trying to get it right. And unknowingly, that is this kind of practice of devotion. And actually, what we're doing in all that trying is practicing devotion. And the result that we want is to be surprised, to have a moment that doesn't feel in our control, to make something where you're like, what? Where did this come from? This character, this way this thing looks. And I do believe it comes not so much out of the trying as the devotion, which ultimately is kind of like putting yourself in someone else's hands. It's not God, maybe specifically, but in the same way that prayer is sort of like, I'm just going to do this till something else fills me. And there's a way we can do that with each other, right? I mean, it's so easy to be surprised by someone who isn't you. And so, of course, as an artist, like I get curious, like, well, here I'm doing this whole devotional practice to be surprised, alone here. What if I'm just surprised the old-fashioned way by something happening that someone else did? And then how can those two things merge? And can they? And can you pull someone into that devotional process through their own internal rigor? And so for family, I did this like sort of alarming casting call on Instagram that I think horrified some people and excited many hundreds of people who sent their pictures in. And probably the thing that probably wouldn't do this again, but I wanted a varied group of people, some people who would never take their clothes off in a million years, and had that sense of their concealment and their body, and some people who really didn't mind being naked. And I thought, well, the only way to get that range that's authentic is to just say, send a picture of yourself to the degree that you're willing to be undressed. And so I got a lot of nudes, learned a lot about bodies, which was kind of great, actually. And then did create a varied group. And also just physically, in terms of what physically you could do and how you did it, in terms of ability, in terms of size and shape of your body. And it was such a great group. I love those 7 people. I worked with them, very remotely. They're all over the place. I didn't even really know where most of them were. Some of them artists themselves, some of them completely not.
That's interesting.
Very different realities. And initially I gave them really specific assignments, like hold this position or do this thing. And then I began to realize they could be looser, and that, again, being surprised was actually the material I wanted to work with. And I would take their videos. So they'd film themselves, they'd upload it, back to Learning to Love You More. And, I'm a person who's worked with a lot of great film tools and like very expensive post houses where you can really do anything at this point. You can create whole things that weren't there, but I don't have any access to that on my own or real interest in it because I don't know how to work those tools. And so I asked my kid, I was like, I know I'm in the realm of TikTok here. If you were trying to just bring someone into like this person doing this movement into my space, how would you do it? Like, what app would you use? And they showed me, and I was like, that's pretty great. That's not clean enough for the feature film world. In fact, this person's entire head is cut off intermittently. But again, wow, that looks amazing.
Works for the art world.
Yeah, I would never think to cut off the head there. And yet it's good enough, real enough that it actually, you kind of do feel like people are in my space. What I really wanted to do was kind of create a physical, sort of a new sexual, physical, swallowing, birth-like language with them. And I did that over time. This actually had to do with looking at, I think it was like 16th century sculpture with a lot of draping, like sometimes people draped entirely in fabric, and that I started asking them to work with sheets or just bags. And also they were getting too specific, like each person was becoming a representation of their particular identity politics, sort of, and at times is too much. And so even for ourselves, I think, like no one wants to be like the woman in that video, And so the draping allowed people to be more just living shapes, and it got just more abstract in how we fit together and how gravity acted upon us. And I was thinking about the idea of family. My own family was changing. I was writing this novel, finishing this novel about what is it that we really need intimacy-wise? Is it this thing that has been handed down to us, or can we create a new thing? And with Instagram being this kind of promise of love, of being looked at so lovingly that you might feel sated, like a baby with its mom, but of course not delivering necessarily. I sort of was like, well, could we deliver on that? Could I make that happen in a low-tech way? So the videos try to do that. And I made 6 for the opening, and then I left 3 with a QR code so that I could then open it to the public, just meaning me in my studio holding a QR code, so that those videos were just placeholders for videos I would make doing the same process, but now with anyone, now that the process was kind of revealed. And so I had 3 to make. I'm just finishing the second one. Yeah, and I have 1 more. And those have been really wonderful to see that the language has now been created enough that I can kind of teach it quite easily.
It's such a profound project. There's this myth or this false promise of social media in some ways that it is a place where you can connect with people. But so often when we don't use it creatively, as you do with this project, we end up feeling really isolated. So I think it's really trying to break these tools apart and finding the flexibility there is such an important part of your work for us as the audience to be able to see. And it gives me a lot of hope actually for technology. And I wanted to ask you, are you optimistic about technology on the whole? The new topic right now is obviously like AI, which feels very foreboding and scary depending on who you ask.
To be honest, at the time, right before learning to love you more, it seemed very disturbing that all companies suddenly had .com on the end of their name. Like that just seemed so icky and boring, right? But having gone through that again and again, each thing seeming kind of corny and bad, and because of this rusting, conquering kind of capitalistic forward-moving thing, the things do not tend to get put back in the box. They tend to keep going. And so as part of my task is to live in reality, not just in some fictional world, I think, well, let me see what I would do with this thing. If I had made it, what would I want to do? And often it's a kind of misuse of it, like Learning to Love You More sort of barely worked at the beginning because the internet wasn't exactly built to make that fun and easy, to make uploading art easy. And, that's how I feel about Instagram. It's like, it's killing me, right? The addiction that has been built into it is unfair, should be illegal. It's no match for a human, but what powers do I have but my work and my curiosity? So applying that to it to actually be wrestling, not just scrolling, and to sort of sculpt my appetite. When I was working on that project, my only interest for a lot of that time was this other secret account that only had 7 people on it. And there was so much happening there that what Instagram was built for, I didn't have the bandwidth for it or interest. And so that is kind of a misuse. If everyone was using it that way, it wouldn't function as far as the ads and stuff. And yeah, I've never had any particular answer, but just knowing that for me, or judgment, other than hating something. But for me personally, knowing to just get locked into hate is not going to serve me in any way. There are also things that I hate about filmmaking and the studio system that social media has messed with. So it's not exactly one thing, the range of people who are thinking of themselves as filmmakers with their concept of what a film might be being something much more intimate than it was described to me in my youth. That's pretty interesting. That's the kind of thing I've always been interested in. So yeah, I guess the parallel organic or grassroots or somehow connected to living bodies experience of technology is, it doesn't end. We haven't gone so far that we're not here.
Mm-hmm. I like that there's always a window open to just subvert and transgress something, whatever it is. And also that any technology or medium, not to go Marshall McLuhan on it, but like brings things back as it obsolesces other things. So it's always like a nuanced situation, I guess. I'm curious what's next for you. You make films, you make books, you make art, you're moving between these various different worlds in which you have membership in each. How do you put the book down, so to speak, and the show's open? How do you move on to a new project, and what will that project be?
I mean, I've always had so many plans. I've often had about 5 years of different projects kind of planned ahead. I guess right now I'm looking at kind of why, like, what was that serving in me? Like, I trust the creative, kind of spiritual and relational part of it. But there's another part of it that I think just had to do with coping and kind of anxiety. And there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I don't think we would have art if people weren't having that feeling and needing to be seen and needing a certain amount of praise and just to be loved, to feel even more special than just the ordinary specialness of being alive, because maybe you don't have access to that. So I guess now that's coming in more, like the ordinary specialness of getting to be here. And it feels really hard won. Like the idea that that could be a prize, like I wouldn't have been interested in that when I was younger, though I also would have said, I don't think this is sustainable. Like I'm assuming there's something at the end where, not the end like death, but like some point where everyone's going to be like, great job. Now you can what? But like, I do think I'm at that point, and it's not other people saying that. It's just myself saying like, great job. Now you never have to do that again. And I don't mean make things, but now you never have to have that feeling in your body again of this kind of, I don't know what to call it. Maybe that'll be one of the things I figure out in the coming years, what that was. But it was limiting. I can tell you that. It kind of took away for all that it gave, and being driven in that particular way. Oof. I mean, this is the kind of thing that just sounds like nothing if you don't know what I'm talking about, which I barely do. So suffice to say, I'm not that interested in making sort of plans that don't have to do with my body. So that would be conjuring plans which might in the future receive recognition or applause. It sounds like I just said I was retiring or something. God forbid. I think what I'm talking about is an energetic thing. So it probably seems huge to me, being the body with the energy, and will maybe be unnoticeable to other people. But that's where I am today.
Right. It seems like there'll be a new urgency that will come after a period of what sounds like, well, it should be recovery after a great time of labor and risk taking. So I'm excited to see what you do next. Really, like, as I said at the top of the hour, like you've always been a lighthouse in the art world, in the film world, in the literary world. So I'm glad that you exist and that you're making things. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure.
That's it for this week's episode. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, please take a moment to rate and review us. It will help other listeners discover what we're doing. The Art Angle is produced by Sonia Manalili and Carolyn Goldstein. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.